Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker and welcome back to my channel. So I was walking with a friend from my last 5e group and we were talking about the D&D landscape and how it has affected our enthusiasm for the game. Whilst we were putting the world to rights, he paused to congratulate me on how my YouTube channel is going and then trailed off a little bit, making me wonder what else he had to say. After a bit of probing, he admitted that BECMI, the edition I promote most on my channel, seemed like a really interesting game and that he would be quite interested in giving it a go again after so many years. But what? I replied. And so he put it like this. If I were to roll up a fighter in BECMI and another player also rolled up a fighter, apart from the stats, what actually makes us different? The question actually caught me off guard. I mean, in a way he was right. When you generate two fighters in BECMI, on paper, they are almost identical. Compare that to two 5th edition fighters, and you've got a wealth of abilities and feats right off the bat. Although the question gave me pause, I felt the answer was obvious. What gave me pause was how someone who had experience of playing old school D&D had been diverted by a system that seemed to offer more, that being 5th edition, but had caused their vision to be narrowed to such an extent that the focus had become the content of the character sheet rather than the content of their character. Who knew I'd be quoting MLK in a BECMI Berserker video? This discussion made me think of a thought-provoking comment I came across in response to one of my previous videos, which was, from 3rd edition D&D, the character sheet has become a prison. And this made me really think about some inner conflict I have felt over the years about the game. As a forever DM, I was watching players become obsessed with the build during character development, and during play, there grew an over-reliance on passing skill checks like diplomacy or sense motive, rather than utilising clever, imaginative and creative play. In fact, as DM, I slipped straight into this trap by unwittingly impeding player attempts to circumvent not having certain skills by trying something else, not recognising that I had myself begun impeding imaginative play. We were in the system, and the system had to be served. The character sheet had become the prison, and we were all stuck inside. It's not until you step outside of something that you're able to see it for what it is, and that was what happened when I left 3rd edition. My return to BECMI in 2008 was liberating, as was the lack of detail on the character sheet. Against my better judgment, 10 years later, I got sucked into the euphoria of 5th edition and was soon subject to yet another convoluted system. It was sold as simplistic, but it wasn't. It was a bloated beast of, I think I can only use the word stuff. And this stuff is what players focus too much of their attention on when doing character generation. In fact, should we still call it character generation, when there's so little focus on what makes up the actual character of the person being played? And before anyone fires back at me with backgrounds, that's just a mechanic for more options, whatever the design intent. So, going back to the conversation I had, I looked at my friend and replied, "The difference is you." To which his immediate response was that it's not him adventuring, it's his character, but all the characters are the same. So I explained it as such. The difference is you. It's what you bring to those stats on your sheet. When you generate your character, what do you see in your mind's eye? Who do you see? Where have they come from? Why are they there? If they're a fighter, what techniques do they use? It may not have any mechanical difference at all, but it will make a huge difference to the story. Think about how authors might conceive a fighter. Tolkien wrote of Boromir as a proud, strong, but flawed man. Eddings wrote of Mandaralan, the Baron of Vomandor, as another proud warrior, but chivalrous, and so confident in his skill as to test the limits of stupidity. Robert E. Howard's Conan was a skilled fighter, who found himself on the wrong side of the law quite often. None of these characters began life as a character sheet. They began as a concept in the minds of their creators, and they grew into memorable characters through their interactions with the world about them, not just how well they swung a sword. In short, what defines you? What makes you different to those around you? your thoughts, your values, your ambitions, your sins. Well, in D&D, this is summed up as your character. Needless to say, my answer was food for thought, and we said our goodbyes. But the conversation prompted me to do this video because, in my opinion, this approach is why D&D inspired so many creatives that today cite the game as being fundamental to their development. It made them think. It made them conceive options that were absent from their character sheets, through interactive and collaborative play. Some of the most satisfying games are when convincing a dungeon master to agree the possibility of something completely unexpected, for which they come up with a number of checks that need to be made, usually against just ability scores. No skill for how far you can jump, no feat for being particularly agile. Just come up with a plan and watch as your DM's face splits with a grin at such a crazy idea and secretly wants you to pull it off. It's this abstract thinking which developed the minds of so many players who went on to be artists, and many more who went on to what we might call regular jobs, but who applied their practiced social intelligence every day. What this taught me is if there is a void in the character sheet, it is quickly filled by creative players, and those players who'd never before tapped their imaginations were sent down rabbit holes that emerged into fantastic and dangerous lands that were ripe for adventure. They didn't know what hit them, and always came back for more. I've noticed that whenever I've had new players try 5th edition, they quickly become a little overwhelmed by everything on the character sheet. They want to know what it all means in case they miss something. In old school, this type of knowledge is just not necessary. A new player can pull up a chair at a table and be just as effective as everyone else because it's not about what's on your character sheet as much as what you bring to the character. No one is going to be telling you you're not using your sneak attack effectively, or where you should be positioned to maximize your effectiveness, or how to use your action, bonus action, and reaction. In old school, there's much less a sense that you don't quite know what you're doing, because with much less recorded on your character sheet to contend with, the main thrust of your character must come from your imagination. And watching a new player realize they can attempt something really wacky is one of the most beautiful things in the world, topped only by it being successful. This is what players coming to old school games such as BECMI can quickly pick up. It's not hard. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's intuitive and natural. Our minds are designed to exploit a given situation. So when a DM describes a room or an event, the head doesn't go down to the character sheet to see what skill or feat to use. It stays lifted and engaged, and glances are exchanged with other players already thinking about manipulating their environment through creative play rather than relying on a catch-all cantrip. If reference to the character sheet is needed, it's most likely to check the availability of a piece of equipment or even a spell, if you have one of them. In my opinion, the free-form feeling of old school really does lend itself to being a much more enjoyable game, for all the lack of difference on a character sheet. And if you don't believe me, consider the recent rise in old school gaming, even before the OGL fiasco. Old School Essentials is doing an excellent job at enticing players to reject 5e, and there are other options, like Dungeon Crawl Classics or Dark Dungeons. You'll hear me go on about BECMI because it's what I know and I'm faithful to my first. What can I say? I still believe it to be the most complete version of the D&D game. You can check out my videos as to why through the link on the screen. Ultimately, what edition you play is up to you, and it's not my place to say what edition you shouldn't play. But to anyone who is like my friend and a little dissuaded from giving Old School a go due to the sparsely populated character sheet and apparent lack of options, please push back against those reservations. Pick up a free Old School retro clone and give it a go, even if it's just for a couple of your group. See how it affects your approach to play compared to contemporary editions. If nothing else, you'll be playing the way Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson envisaged the game, which is something every D&D player should try, I think. In addition, it'll give you another gaming option for your group, should you ever need it. My objective here is to get people to consider old versions of the game as viable alternatives. Not to say it was better in the good old days, but to show that perhaps that lean approach to play and character generation, the epitome of less is more, can lead to incredibly imaginative and creative experiences. I'll stop bothering you now. Thank you for listening to me drone on again about the merits of old school play, and please consider watching my series on the BECMI edition of the game. Otherwise, please like and subscribe if I deserve your future attention. I'm BECMI Berserker, and I hope to see you back here soon.